Hey everyone, welcome back. Get comfortable, grab your tea or whatever you're sipping on tonight, because we're diving into a case that's haunted Vermont for over 20 years. This is the story of Brianna Maitland, a 17-year-old girl who vanished into thin air on March 19, 2004, leaving behind one of the most perplexing crime scenes investigators have ever encountered. Picture this: it's a cold March night in rural Vermont. A teenage girl finishes her shift at a cozy inn, gets in her car to drive home, and just disappears. The next day, her car is found backed into an abandoned farmhouse about a mile from where she worked. The doors are unlocked. Her paychecks are sitting on the front seat. Some loose change and a necklace are scattered on the ground. But Brianna? She's nowhere to be found. And here's the thing that makes this case so haunting: it wasn't treated as suspicious at first. The trooper who found the car assumed it was just a drunk driving incident. He had the car towed and went off duty. It took days before anyone connected that abandoned car to a missing teenager. By then, crucial evidence had been lost, the crime scene had been contaminated, and Brianna's trail had gone completely cold. 20 years later, her family is still searching. Investigators still have active leads. And somewhere out there, someone knows what happened to Brianna Maitland. So let's start at the beginning and try to piece together what happened on that March night in 2004. Brianna Alexandra Maitland was born on October 8, 1986, in Burlington, Vermont, to Bruce and Kelly Maitland. She grew up on her parents' farm in East Franklin, a tiny rural town in northern Vermont, literally a couple miles from the Canadian border. We're talking about a place where everybody knows everybody, where there's more cows than people, and where life moves at a slower pace. Brianna had an older brother, and by all accounts, she had a pretty normal childhood. The family didn't even have a television, so Brianna spent a lot of her time reading books and, interestingly, training in jiu-jitsu. She was actually quite skilled in martial arts, something that's going to become really important later in this story. Her family and friends described her as smart, outgoing, fun to be around, and fiercely independent. She had that kind of personality where she knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to go after it. She was also described as having this beautiful smile that could light up a room. That's why I call this the missing smile. Brianna initially attended Missisquoi Valley Union High School in Swanton, Vermont, but she didn't really fit in there. So during her sophomore year, she transferred to Enosburg Falls High School in nearby Enosburg Falls. This is where things started to shift in Brianna's life. At Enosburg Falls, Brianna had a tight-knit group of friends: Katie Manning, Megan Jefferson, Kelly Lacrosse, Sydney Kuhn, and Hillary Robitaille. These 6 girls were inseparable. They did everything together, and for a while, Brianna seemed really happy. But as she got older, Brianna started feeling restless. She wanted more independence. She wanted to experience life beyond her parents' farm. And on October 8, 2003, her 17th birthday, she made a big decision: she was moving out. Now, her parents Bruce and Kelly weren't thrilled about this, but they understood. Brianna wasn't running away from a bad situation. Her home life was stable, her parents were supportive. She just wanted to be her own person. She wanted to live closer to her friends. She wanted to figure out who she was as an adult. So Brianna moved out. But here's where things got complicated. Her living arrangements were really unstable. She bounced around from friend's house to friend's house. She was couch surfing, basically. Sometimes she'd stay with one friend for a few weeks, then move to another friend's place. It wasn't ideal, but Brianna was determined to make it work. By late February 2004, she had dropped out of high school entirely and moved in with her childhood friend, Jillian Stout, in Sheldon, Vermont, about 20 miles west of where she'd eventually disappear. Now, before you think, troubled teen, let me clarify. Brianna dropped out of high school, but she immediately enrolled in a GED program. She was working 2 jobs to support herself, one as a dishwasher at the Black Lantern Inn in Montgomery, and another as a waitress at KJ's Diner in St. Albans. She was talking about going to college part-time. She had plans. She had goals. This wasn't a girl who was spiraling out of control. But there were some things happening in Brianna's life that were concerning. And one of those things involved a girl named Kelly Lacrosse. Remember how I mentioned Brianna's friend group? One of those girls was Kelly Lacrosse. Kelly and Brianna had been close friends throughout high school. But by early 2004, things between them had become tense. Here's what happened. Kelly had a boyfriend named James Robitaille. And while Kelly was out of town one week, she found out that Brianna had stayed at James's house. James later admitted that he'd cheated on Kelly with Brianna. Now, I don't know all the details of what went down between Brianna and James. Maybe it was a full-on relationship. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Maybe Brianna didn't even know James was Kelly's boyfriend. We don't know, but what we do know is that Kelly was furious. Kelly saw Brianna in James's car one day and shouted at them as they drove off. And a few days later, on February 24, 2004, about 3 weeks before Brianna disappeared, Brianna showed up to a party with James. Kelly was there, and she was livid. According to witnesses, Kelly antagonized Brianna throughout the night. She was making comments, trying to get a reaction out of her. But Brianna didn't engage, she just ignored her. Eventually, Brianna had enough and went outside to sit in James's car. That's when Kelly followed her. Kelly walked up to the car and knocked on the window. Brianna rolled it down, and Kelly punched her in the face. Twice. Hard. According to witnesses, Kelly was shouting at Brianna, asking if she was going to come out and fight. But Brianna just sat there with her head down, crying. She didn't fight back. She didn't defend herself. She just took it. James eventually came outside and Kelly walked away. But the damage was done. Brianna was taken to the hospital where she was treated for a broken nose, a concussion, 2 black eyes, and facial cuts. The doctors said she'd been hit multiple times in the face. Now here's the part that's really interesting. Brianna was trained in jiu-jitsu. She had years of martial arts training. She absolutely could have defended herself. But she chose not to. When her parents asked her why she didn't fight back, Brianna said, "I didn't want anyone to not like me." That breaks my heart. Brianna was so concerned about being liked, about maintaining her friendships, that she was willing to take a beating rather than stand up for herself. Her friend Shauna encouraged her to file a police report, and Brianna eventually did, though she was hesitant. She pressed assault charges against Kelly LaCrosse. And those charges were still pending when Brianna disappeared 3 weeks later. Now, I want to be clear about something. Kelly LaCrosse was investigated extensively after Brianna's disappearance. She was cooperative with police, she was questioned multiple times, and she was eventually cleared of any involvement. There's no evidence that Kelly had anything to do with Brianna vanishing. But that assault? It's an important piece of the puzzle. Because it shows that Brianna had enemies. It shows that there were people who were angry with her. And it shows that just weeks before she disappeared, Brianna was involved in a violent altercation. So that's the context. That's where Brianna was in her life in March 2004. She was living independently, working 2 jobs, studying for her GED, and navigating some complicated friendships and relationships. And then came March 19, 2004. Friday, March 19, 2004, started as one of the best days of Brianna's life. That morning, Brianna woke up early and met her mom, Kelly, for breakfast. Then they drove about 40 miles to Burlington, Vermont, where Brianna was taking the final portion of her GED exam, the math test, at the Community College of Vermont. Brianna passed. She was officially done with her GED. Her mom later said that Brianna was in great spirits. She was excited. They went out to lunch to celebrate, and Brianna was talking about her plans for the future. She wanted to go to college part-time. She wanted to keep working and saving money. She had dreams. After lunch, Brianna and Kelly spent the afternoon shopping and running errands in St. Albans. They went to stores, they talked, they just spent quality mother-daughter time together. But then something weird happened. According to Kelly, while they were waiting in the checkout line of a store, something outside caught Brianna's attention. Brianna told her mom, "I'll be right back," and left the store. Kelly finished her purchase and met Brianna in the parking lot. And Kelly immediately noticed that Brianna seemed different. She seemed unnerved, shaken, agitated, like something had spooked her. Kelly asked what was wrong, but Brianna brushed it off. She said she needed to get home and get ready for her shift at the Black Lantern Inn. Around 2:45 p.m., Kelly dropped Brianna back at Jillian Stout's house in Sheldon. Jillian wasn't home from school yet, so Brianna left her a note that said something like, "I get off work between 10 and 12. I'll see you after." She also left the phone number for the Black Lantern Inn. Then Brianna hopped into her 1985 pale green Oldsmobile Delta 88, a big, boxy, old-school sedan, and drove about 30 minutes to the Black Lantern Inn in Montgomery. The Black Lantern Inn is this cozy New England bed and breakfast. It's housed in a brick building with white pillars around the front porch, very charming and homey. During the colder months, there's a wood stove burning inside. It's the kind of place where locals gather for comfort food and conversation. It's not a rowdy bar or anything, it's low-key and family-friendly. Brianna clocked in for her shift as a dishwasher around 3:15 p.m. According to her coworkers, Brianna's shift was completely uneventful. She didn't have any visitors. She didn't make or receive any phone calls. She just did her job, washing dishes and helping out in the kitchen. Everything was normal. Around 11:20 p.m., Brianna clocked out. Her coworkers invited her to stay and have dinner with them, but Brianna declined. She said she needed to get home and rest because she had to work her second job at KJ's Diner early the next morning. One of her coworkers walked out to the parking lot with Brianna and watched her get into her Oldsmobile. That coworker saw Brianna drive away, turning left out of the parking lot onto Route 118. That was the last confirmed sighting of Brianna Maitland. She was supposed to drive home to Sheldon, which was about a 30-minute drive. She never made it. Now, here's what's important to understand about the timeline. Brianna's roommate, Jillian, was away visiting family that weekend. So Jillian didn't see the note Brianna had left. She didn't expect Brianna to be home. And when Brianna didn't show up, Jillian didn't immediately think anything was wrong. Brianna also wasn't scheduled to work at either of her jobs on Saturday, March 20th. So her coworkers didn't notice she was missing either. And her parents? They thought Brianna was busy with work and her own life. They didn't expect to hear from her every single day. So when they didn't hear from her on Saturday, they didn't panic. This is why it took so long for anyone to realize Brianna was missing. Everyone assumed she was with someone else. But while everyone thought Brianna was safe, her car was sitting abandoned on the side of the road, backed into an old farmhouse. And Brianna was nowhere to be found. Saturday afternoon, March 20th, 2004. About 1:15 p.m. a Vermont State Police trooper receives a call about an abandoned vehicle on Route 118 near an old abandoned farmhouse. The location is in the village of Richford, about a mile from the Black Lantern Inn. The trooper drives out to investigate, and what he sees is odd. There's a pale green 1985 Oldsmobile Delta 88 backed into the side of an abandoned house. Not just parked near it, backed into it. The rear bumper is literally stuck on the foundation of the house, lifting the rear tires off the ground and disabling the vehicle. The house itself is locally known as the Old Dutchburn House. It's been abandoned for years. The windows are boarded up with plywood. The siding is falling apart. Nobody lives there, and this car is just backed into it at an odd angle. The trooper walks around the vehicle and notices some things on the ground. Loose change scattered around, a necklace lying near the car, and a water bottle. There's also an unsmoked cigarette on the ground. He looks inside the vehicle. The doors are unlocked. The keys are nowhere to be seen. But on the front seat, he finds 2 unopened paychecks from the Black Lantern Inn. The name on the paychecks, Brianna Maitland. Now, here's where this case takes a frustrating turn. The trooper makes a decision. Instead of running the license plates to find the registered owner, which would have led him directly to Kelly Maitland, Brianna's mother, he decides to track down the Black Lantern Inn and the person listed on the paychecks. He calls for a tow truck and drives over to the Black Lantern Inn. But it's Saturday afternoon, and the restaurant is closed. So the trooper just signs off duty. He assumes this is a drunk driving incident, or maybe someone abandoned their car after an accident. He figures it can wait until Monday. The car gets towed to a local garage. And that's it. The trooper moves on to other calls. Nobody contacts Brianna's parents. Nobody checks to see if anyone has reported the car or its owner missing. Nobody treats this as a potential crime scene. For days, that car just sits in a garage while Brianna is missing and nobody knows it. Fast forward to Tuesday, March 23, 2004. Jillian Stout returns home from visiting family. She sees the note Brianna left on Friday, saying she'd be home between 10 and 12 that night. But Brianna never came home. Her stuff is still there, but Brianna isn't. Jillian starts calling around. She calls Brianna's friends. She calls Brianna's parents. And that's when Kelly and Bruce Maitland realize they haven't heard from their daughter in days. They start calling everyone. Brianna's friends, her co-workers, her other job at KJ's diner. Nobody has seen her. Nobody has heard from her. On March 23, Kelly contacts the Vermont State Police to report Brianna missing. 2 days later, on March 25, Bruce and Kelly go to the state police barracks in St. Albans to drop off photographs of Brianna for the missing person investigation. And that's when a trooper shows them a picture. It's a pale green Oldsmobile Delta 88, backed into an abandoned farmhouse. Bruce and Kelly immediately recognize it as the car Brianna had been driving, the car Kelly owned. The car that had been sitting in a garage for 5 days. The car that nobody had connected to a missing teenager. By the time investigators realized this was Brianna's car and returned to the scene, crucial evidence had been lost. The crime scene had been trampled by the tow truck driver, by curious locals who'd seen the car, by weather. Any footprints in the dirt were gone. Any tire tracks were destroyed. The golden hours, the first 48 to 72 hours after someone goes missing, when evidence is freshest and witnesses' memories are clearest, were completely wasted. This is one of the biggest failures in this entire case. If that trooper had run the plates on Saturday, Brianna's parents would have been notified immediately. Investigators could have processed the scene right away. They could have started searching for her when the trail was still warm. Instead, they lost 5 critical days. So let's talk about what investigators found when they finally processed Brianna's car and the surrounding area. The car was backed into the Dutchburn house at an odd angle. The rear bumper was wedged against the foundation, lifting the rear tires off the ground. There were no skid marks on the road. There were no indications that the car had veered off the road in an uncontrolled manner. In other words, whoever backed that car into the house did it deliberately. It wasn't an accident. Inside the car, investigators found 2 unopened paychecks from the Black Lantern Inn addressed to Brianna. Brianna's migraine medication, her contact lenses and contact lens case, her driver's license, makeup, her ATM card, her glasses. Basically, everything Brianna would have needed to function day to day was still in the car. Outside the car, scattered on the ground, they found loose change. A necklace, a water bottle, an unsmoked cigarette. There was also a piece of plywood that had been covering one of the boarded-up windows of the house. That plywood was now lying on the trunk of the car, like someone had pulled it off the window. And here's something interesting. In a field near the car, investigators found a woman's fleece jacket. But according to Brianna's family and friends, it didn't belong to her. Nobody knows whose jacket it was or how it got there. Now, when they processed the car for forensic evidence, they found something crucial: DNA. There was DNA evidence on and around the car that did not belong to Brianna. For years, that DNA sat in evidence, unidentified. Investigators ran it through every database they had: Cody's, missing persons databases, everything. No matches. But fast forward to 2022. Advances in genetic genealogy, the same technology that caught the Golden State Killer, allowed investigators to identify the source of that DNA. In March 2022, Vermont State Police announced that they had identified the DNA. It belonged to someone who had been in or around Brianna's car. But here's the important part. Identifying the DNA does not mean they've identified a suspect. It just means they know whose DNA it is. That person could be a witness. They could be someone who touched the car innocently. Or they could be involved in Brianna's disappearance. The police have not publicly released the identity of the person whose DNA was found, and they've made it clear that identifying the DNA is just one piece of the puzzle. Now, let's talk about the other evidence, or lack thereof. Police searched the area around the Dutchburn house extensively. They brought in search dogs. They combed the woods on foot. They checked nearby bodies of water. They searched abandoned buildings. They found nothing. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No clothing. No indication of where Brianna went after her car was abandoned. The FBI eventually got involved and issued a statement in 2007 saying that they believed the scene where Brianna's car was found may have been staged to appear as an accident. Think about that. The car was deliberately backed into the house. The doors were left unlocked. Brianna's belongings were left inside. It was made to look like maybe she crashed her car while drunk and wandered off. But investigators don't think that's what happened. They think someone staged the scene to buy time, to throw off the investigation, to make it look like Brianna left on her own. So what happened to Brianna Maitland? Over the past 20 years, investigators, family members, and amateur sleuths have developed several theories. Let me walk you through the main ones. Theory number 1. Brianna was the victim of a random abduction. This is the simplest explanation. Brianna was driving home late at night on a rural road. Someone stopped her, maybe by faking an emergency, maybe by blocking the road, and abducted her. They then staged her car to make it look like an accident and disposed of her body somewhere it hasn't been found. The problem with this theory is that Brianna's car was found about a mile from where she worked. It's not on the route she would have taken home to Sheldon. So why was she there? Did someone force her to drive there? Or did she go there willingly? Theory number 2. The assault played a role. Some people think Kelly LaCrosse or someone connected to that February assault was involved. Maybe there was retaliation. Maybe friends of Kelly decided to teach Brianna a lesson, and things went too far. But as I mentioned earlier, Kelly was thoroughly investigated and cleared. And there's no evidence connecting her or anyone in that friend group to Brianna's disappearance. Theory number 3. Drug connections. This is where things get really dark. In 2004, there was a significant drug problem in rural Vermont. Crack cocaine and other hard drugs were prevalent, especially in the area where Brianna lived. And there were rumors, just rumors, that Brianna had experimented with drugs or knew people involved in the drug trade. About a week after Brianna disappeared, Vermont State Police received an anonymous tip claiming that she was being held against her will in a house in nearby Berkshire, Vermont. The house was allegedly occupied by Ramon L. Ryans and Nathaniel Charles Jackson, 2 drug dealers from New York who were known to be operating in the area. Police raided the house on April 15, 2004. They found substantial amounts of cocaine and marijuana, but no sign of Brianna. However, the informant claimed that Brianna had known both Ryans and Jackson from past drug experimentation. Then, in late 2004, police received an even more disturbing statement from an anonymous older woman. In a signed affidavit, this woman claimed that Ramon Ryans had murdered Brianna during an argument over money she had lent him to purchase crack cocaine. According to this woman's statement, Brianna was killed approximately a week after her disappearance. Her body was temporarily stored in the basement of a local woman's home. Then it was allegedly dismembered with a table saw and disposed of on a pig farm. Police investigated these claims thoroughly. They even drained a manure pit on a property associated with one of the suspects. But they found nothing. No body, no physical evidence, no corroboration. To this day, we don't know if that anonymous tip was credible or just someone stirring up drama. Theory number 4. Connection to Maura Murray. Some people have speculated that Brianna's disappearance might be connected to Maura Murray, a Massachusetts nursing student who vanished under mysterious circumstances just 25 miles away in New Hampshire about 2 weeks before Brianna disappeared. Both were young women. Both disappeared from rural areas. Both left behind vehicles with personal belongings inside. Both cases remain unsolved. But investigators have found no evidence linking the 2 cases. It seems to be a tragic coincidence rather than a connection. Theory number 5. Brianna witnessed something she shouldn't have. This theory suggests that Brianna saw something that night, maybe drug activity, maybe a crime in progress, and whoever was involved silenced her to protect themselves. The fact that Brianna seemed agitated and nervous after leaving that store with her mom earlier in the day lends some credence to this theory. Maybe she saw someone she was afraid of. Maybe she had knowledge about something dangerous. But again, there's no concrete evidence. 20 years later, Brianna Maitland's case remains unsolved. Her family has never stopped searching for her. Her father, Bruce Maitland, has worked tirelessly with private investigators to keep her case in the public eye. He's offered rewards for information. He's given countless interviews. He's never given up hope that someday, somehow, he'll find out what happened to his daughter. In recent years, advances in DNA technology have given investigators new leads. The identification of DNA found at the scene could potentially break the case wide open, if investigators can connect it to Brianna's disappearance. But as of right now, Brianna is still missing. Her family still doesn't have answers. And somewhere out there, someone knows what happened. If you have any information about Brianna Maitland's disappearance, please contact the Vermont State Police at 1-844-84-VTIPS or the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI. Brianna Maitland was 17 years old when she vanished. She'd be 38 now. She'd have lived half her life missing. Her family deserves closure. Brianna deserves justice. And that beautiful smile? It deserves to be remembered. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one. Story 2. The Lake That Keeps Its Secrets. The Disappearance of Cindy Song. Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're talking about a case that's haunted Penn State University for over 2 decades. It's the story of Cindy Song, a 21-year-old senior who vanished on Halloween night in 2001 while wearing a bunny costume. On Halloween night 24 years ago, Penn State student Yun Song, known to friends as Cindy, joined the throngs of students for a night of partying and revelry. Donning a bunny costume, she and her friends went to Players Nightclub, now the Basement, on West College Avenue, where they danced, drank, and enjoyed the holiday. At 4 a.m. on November 1, 2001, her roommate, Stacy Pate, dropped Song off at her apartment on Blue Course Drive. That was the last time she, or anyone, would see Song alive. When police entered her apartment, everything seemed normal. Her backpack was by the door. Her cell phone was there. Even her false eyelashes, the ones she'd worn with her costume, had been removed and left on the bathroom counter. It looked like she'd made it home safely and started getting ready for bed. But then she vanished. Without a trace. Her purse was gone. Her ID was gone. Her credit cards were gone. And so was her bunny costume. Tonight, we're going to walk through every detail of this case. From who Cindy was, to the night she disappeared, to the serial killer who may have been involved, to why this case remains unsolved over 20 years later. So get comfortable. Let's dive in. Cindy Song was born February 25, 1980, in South Korea, where she spent the first 15 years of her life. Her Korean name was Yun Song, but when she moved to America, she adopted the name Cindy. In 1995, she moved to Virginia to live with her aunt and uncle for better educational opportunities. She attended Hayfield Secondary School in Alexandria, Virginia, and by all accounts, she thrived there. Neither institution retains any teaching staff with memory of Song, but her high school yearbook shows a bright-eyed young woman with dreams bigger than herself. She also discovered a passion for the arts, writing on her blog her love for art, film, music, photography, and dancing. After graduating high school, Cindy was accepted into Pennsylvania State University. Penn State is a massive school, over 40,000 students at the time, located in State College, Pennsylvania. It's a quintessential college town, the kind of place where the entire community revolves around the university. At Penn State, she majored in integrative arts, an uncommon course of study designed by students where she created her own curriculum combining engineering, communications, and science. She worked 2 jobs while balancing her studies, preparing to graduate in spring 2002. Her professors saw her as someone with vision. Her friends described her as reliable. The kind of person you could trust to show up even when she was stretched thin. She quickly joined the Korean Undergraduate Student Association, the American Red Cross and Advertising Club. Cindy took to her Penn State profile to express herself, posting pictures of herself with friends, along with her likes and dislikes. If things got more aspirational, she may have even revealed that she intended to become a famous, popular, rich, talented graphic and fashion designer. Things, however, could have turned sour if you were revealed to be a faker, a liar, or a cheap ass, some of her greatest dislikes. But beyond the surface-level college experience, Cindy's life was more complicated than it appeared. One of her friends, Richard Chai, became particularly close to Cindy and they fell in love, moving into an off-campus apartment together. But things didn't last. Friends say Richard abruptly ended the relationship and moved out of the apartment in September 2001, leaving Cindy heartbroken, in bad shape, but determined to move on. So just 2 months before she disappeared, Cindy had gone through a painful breakup. Cindy soon found a new roommate, Yeonju, also known as Catherine, to move in with, and the pair started to bond. But on October 25, weeks after the beginning of the school year, Cindy posted a poem she'd written, and the content of that poem would haunt those who knew her in the weeks to come. The meaning of this personal piece of poetry would loom large over family and friends, making some wonder if Cindy had been struggling emotionally in ways she hadn't shared. One of Cindy's first friends at Penn State, Yong Sin Yi, told the Center Daily Times, "She always trusts what other people tell her. She's kind of naive." That detail, that Cindy was trusting, maybe too trusting, becomes important when we start looking at the theories about what happened to her. By Halloween 2001, Cindy was 21 years old, a senior preparing to graduate in the spring. She had too much in front of her, too many plans. The idea that Cindy would vanish voluntarily never made sense to those who knew her. In Cindy's room, the authorities found concert tickets and a receipt for a new computer that was due to be delivered. She had tickets to see Britney Spears' Dream Within a Dream Tour concert in Philadelphia on December 10, 2001. She clearly didn't run away. So what happened to her? October 31, 2001. Halloween. A Wednesday night. The town of State College, Pennsylvania, buzzed with Halloween energy. Halloween in State College has always carried a certain electricity. The bars swell with costumed students. Music spills from apartments and the streets echo with the laughter of young people chasing a night they'll half forget in the morning. Cindy was in high spirits as she joined her friends Stacy Paik and Lisa Kim at Players Nightclub to celebrate. She was dressed up as a bunny, wearing bunny ears, a white tennis skirt with an attached tail, brown suede knee-high boots, and a red parka. The three friends danced and drank until the early morning hours. All three partied until 2 a.m. the next morning, when they left and stopped off at a friend's apartment to play video games. A couple hours later, Stacy drives Cindy home at the State College Park apartment complex, grabbing something to eat at the Uni Mart on the way. She watches Cindy walk towards her apartment before driving off. At 4 a.m. on November 1, 2001, Stacy Paik dropped Song off at her apartment 363 in what is now the Elite State College complex on Blue Course Drive. She was last seen walking up the stairs to her apartment in the early hours of November 1, 2001. That was the last time anyone saw Cindy Song alive. Now here's where things get strange. Because everything suggests that Cindy made it inside her apartment safely. But then she left again. And nobody knows why. Cindy's roommate returned home later that day from an extended trip to Philadelphia. She expected Cindy to be home because the two had made plans to catch up with each other before going out with friends. She found the door locked from the outside and the apartment empty. Initially, she wasn't concerned about Cindy's absence because nothing was out of the ordinary. She thought Cindy would be returning soon. But Cindy never came back. When Cindy failed to show up for a shift at one of her jobs and couldn't be reached, her friends became concerned. They reported her missing on November 4, 2001, 3 days after she was dropped off in front of her apartment. Song was an independent girl who often went off on her own, so they didn't think much of it until she was reported to have missed a shift at the Korean restaurant where she worked. When police finally entered Cindy's apartment, what they found was puzzling. There were no signs of struggle, and her false eyelashes she had worn that night had been taken off and left there, indicating that Song made it into the residence unharmed. Her backpack she had worn earlier that night was also in the residence, along with her phone. Her backpack sat by the door. Her cell phone was in its usual spot. Even her false eyelashes had been removed, suggesting she had at least started her nightly routine before disappearing. But other things were gone. Her purse, her ID, her credit cards, and the bunny costume itself. That detail struck investigators. Why would she remove her lashes but leave in the same outfit she had worn all night? Why take her ID and cards if she wasn't planning to go somewhere? No signs of forced entry. No overturned furniture. No noise reported by neighbors. Police reviewed her phone records and confirmed that there were no calls made or received after she was dropped off on November 1. There was no activity on her credit cards. Her emails held nothing suspicious. So here's what we know. Cindy made it home. She took off her false eyelashes. She put down her backpack with her phone inside. And then, for some reason, she left again, still wearing her bunny costume, taking only her purse with her ID and credit cards. Where was she going at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning? Police would analyze Cindy's credit card and bank statements, and found no activity after arriving back home at around 4 a.m. on November 1st. Since there was no sign of a struggle or forced entry in Cindy's apartment, and no one in her large apartment complex had seen or heard anything, it was assumed that she hadn't been forcibly abducted from there. However, investigators theorized that she might have been lured by someone out of her apartment, or that someone may have happened upon Cindy along the street. One of the prevailing theories is that Cindy decided to walk to a nearby 24-hour store. A theory, which still remains prominent, is that Song decided to venture to one of the 24-hour grocery stores like Giant or Walmart located near her apartment, encountering something on the way. But no evidence could be supplied to prove this. Her friends mentioned her habit of visiting the market late at night. So maybe Cindy went to grab something from the store. Maybe she ran into someone she knew. Maybe someone saw her walking alone in her bunny costume and saw an opportunity. We don't know. FBI Special Agent Stephen Collins told reporters with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, "Usually, we have physical evidence. It's surprising that there's no physical evidence. It could be a deft abductor." After labeling her a missing person, authorities would begin to search the area around Cindy's apartment, including a large wooded area along the perimeter of Penn State. There, search and rescue teams focused primarily on wooded areas and bike paths, but were aided by numerous helicopter searches, which scanned the areas surrounding Park Hills, Park Forest, and Teaberry Ridge inside of Ferguson Township. Multiple search and rescue operations would take place in the weeks to come, expanding out from Cindy's apartment, the place she had last been seen, to locations further and further away. Posters with Cindy's face would soon go up all around State College and the surrounding area, with Cindy's friends and family receiving a lot of support from groups and organizations at Penn State, such as the Black Caucus, who helped raise awareness for Cindy's disappearance in the weeks and months that followed. Students and family participated in a moment of silence during the Cindy Song prayer vigil outside of the hub. But despite all the searches, all the awareness campaigns, all the media attention, there was nothing. No trace of Cindy Song. On November 15, 2001, Lieutenant Drew Clemson of the Ferguson Township Police Department told the Center Daily Times, "We're just kind of banging our heads against the wall. We've just gotten nowhere." By that point, various search and rescue operations had been conducted throughout State College and the surrounding area, looking for any sign of Cindy Song. They had all failed to turn up a trace of her, even when aided by bloodhounds and other tracking dogs near her apartment. At the same time, police had spoken with those close to Cindy multiple times, and had been unable to come up with any tantalizing leads, with those interviews failing to translate into any evidence. In mid-December 2001, more than a month after Cindy's disappearance, authorities began to approach the case as a possible abduction, despite there being no hard evidence indicating such. And then, in early December, they got a tip. A witness in Philadelphia, over 200 miles away, claimed they had seen something. On December 5, 2001, 35 days after Song was last seen, Ferguson police investigated its first promising lead, a tip from Philadelphia. The lead involved a witness who claimed to see someone matching Cindy's description being forced against their will into a vehicle by a man in the Chinatown section of the city. The woman was supposedly yelling for help, and the man was reported to be of Arabic or Asian background, having an olive complexion. Despite her attempt to help, the witness was chased away by the man, who warned her to mind her own business. This was huge. Finally, a potential lead. Someone who might have seen Cindy being abducted. But there were problems with this tip. In the end, the tip was deemed essentially useless. However, as the search became more dire months later, the witness was put under controlled hypnosis to determine if any further details could be obtained, but nothing new came from it. The police have been skeptical of this sighting because the witness has changed her story several times. And think about the logistics. Philadelphia is over 200 miles from State College. That's a 3-hour drive. How would Cindy have ended up in Philadelphia within days of her disappearance? Why Philadelphia? Why Chinatown specifically? It didn't add up, and police eventually determined that the woman in Philadelphia was probably not Cindy Song. So the investigation stalled again. By February 2002, Ferguson Township Police Chief Ed Connor said that Cindy's disappearance would be declared inactive if no leads began to materialize by the middle of the month. This came just 3.5 months after Cindy's disappearance. Chief Connor told the Center Daily Times, "Basically, nobody is actively pursuing the case at that time, but they revisit it periodically if a new idea is triggered, when a detective comes up with a new thought or things slow down on their caseload." But just as the case was about to go cold, something happened that would change everything. In 2003, almost 2 years after Cindy disappeared, Pennsylvania law enforcement made a horrifying discovery. They found human remains buried on the property of a man named Hugo Selensky in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. And the person who led them there? A man named Paul Weekly, Selensky's former accomplice. In June of 2003, a murderer and informant named Paul Weekly shocked police with a chilling story about two career criminals, Hugo Selensky and Michael Kurkowski. Weekly told police that the men had abducted a woman who they believed to be a sex worker from State College. He stated that the two men had taken her to Selensky's house. Selensky told police that he and another man, Michael Jason Kurkowski Jr., saw Song on the night of her disappearance, mistook her for a prostitute, and kidnapped her and kept her imprisoned in a walk-in safe in his home until she died. He says they then buried Song's body in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. He said he killed Kurkowski after learning that he had kept Song's bunny ears as a souvenir of the crime. In 2003, Newswatch 16's John Meyer spoke with the lead investigator on Cindy's case about a tip that she was kidnapped and killed by Hugo Selensky. "This has given us a little hope here in this case. It has been our best lead, and we're going to follow up until we disprove it or prove it," Ferguson Township Police Detective Brian Sprinkle said in 2003. Selensky is a convicted murderer and robber from Luzerne County. When police searched Selensky's property, they made a gruesome discovery. When police later searched Selensky's property in Luzerne County, they unearthed the remains of at least 5 individuals, burned and buried. The discovery horrified the state and confirmed Selensky's capacity for violence. Upon searching his land, state police found Kurkowski and his girlfriend to be 2 of the 5 bodies they eventually recovered. 3 other partial sets of human remains were found in Selensky's large outdoor burn pit. But here's the thing, among the remains, Cindy was not found. According to Mayer, no DNA ever recovered from Selensky's property matched Cindy's. Paul Weekly, who is serving a life sentence in an Indiana federal prison, reported that Selensky and Kurkowski had picked Cindy up, and Kurkowski had his way with her, eventually leaving her to die in his home. It was revealed, though, that Weekly had researched the case independently and had downloaded information on Cindy's disappearance from the internet before having discussions with police. So Weekly had researched Cindy's case online before talking to police. Which means he could have just made the whole story up based on publicly available information. In January 2014, authorities announced that the badly destroyed remains of 7 other people were found on Selensky's property. They have looked into the possibility that one of the sets belongs to Cindy, however, she has not yet been linked to them. Finally, in 2015, he was convicted of the murders of Kurkowski and his girlfriend, Tammy Fassett, who were also found on his property. He was sentenced to life in prison. He is still considered a suspect in this case. However, her body has never been found. Investigators were never able to connect Selensky to the case. And just like the rest of Cindy Song's case, that lead also went cold. Despite the sensational lead, investigators could never definitively tie Selensky to her disappearance. So we have a serial killer who claims he killed Cindy Song. His accomplice backs up the story. But there's no physical evidence. No DNA, no body, nothing. Was Selensky telling the truth? Or was he just trying to add another victim to his list to seem more notorious? We'll never know for sure. So what happened to Cindy Song? After more than 2 decades, we still don't know. More than 2 decades later, Cindy Song's case remains open and unsolved. But police in Center County and Cindy's family in South Korea have not abandoned the search for answers. The Ferguson Township Police Department in Center County is still in charge of Cindy Song's case. The department formed a cold case task force because of Cindy, which has resulted in charges in a case from 2016, set to go to trial in the coming months. In the years since, Cindy's disappearance has joined the lexicon of local legend. Her story has been featured on Unsolved Mysteries. Her story is repeated in true crime podcasts, whispered in state college dorms and retold to incoming students who ask about the region's most unsettling mysteries. Unlike folklore though, this story is not imagined. A real person, with a name and a future, never came home. There is something about the details that won't let the story go. The costume left behind in fragments, the mundane objects of everyday life still in place, the unfinished narrative of a student who had only begun to sketch out her adulthood. Cindy Song was 21 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She was months away from graduating. She had concert tickets. She had a new computer being delivered. She had dreams of becoming a famous graphic designer. And then, in the early morning hours of November 1, 2001, she walked up the stairs to her apartment, and vanished. If you know anything about Cindy Song's disappearance, please contact the Ferguson Township Police Department at 814-237-1172. Thanks for listening tonight. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Story 3. Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're talking about a case that's been haunting Orlando, Florida for nearly 20 years. This is the story of Jennifer Kesse, a bright, ambitious 24-year-old woman who vanished on her way to work on what should have been just another Tuesday morning. January 24, 2006. Jennifer had just returned from a romantic vacation to St. Croix with her boyfriend. She was living in her first condo that she bought all on her own. She'd just been promoted at work. Everything in her life was finally coming together. And then she disappeared, without a trace. Her car was found abandoned a mile from her home. Security footage captured someone parking her car and walking away. But the person's face was perfectly obscured in every single frame, like they knew exactly where the cameras were. What makes this case so frustrating is that investigators believe they know what happened. They have theories, they have suspects. They even have surveillance footage of the person who likely took her. But after nearly 20 years, Jennifer Kesse has never been found. And despite new DNA evidence discovered in 2025, her disappearance remains one of Florida's most baffling unsolved mysteries. So settle in. This is going to be a detailed one. Because Jennifer's story deserves to be told in full. Let's get into it. Jennifer Joyce Kesse was born on May 20, 1981, in New Jersey. Her family, parents Joyce and Drew, and younger brother Logan, eventually moved to Tampa, Florida, where Jennifer grew up. From an early age, Jennifer was driven. She was the kind of person who set goals and achieved them. She graduated from Vivian Gaither High School in Tampa in 1999, where she was well liked and involved in various activities. After high school, Jennifer enrolled at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. She chose to major in finance, a practical, stable career path. And she excelled at it. While in college, she joined the Alpha Delta Pi sorority and built a strong social circle. In 2003, Jennifer graduated with her bachelor's degree in finance. And unlike a lot of recent college graduates who move back home with their parents, Jennifer had a plan. She landed a job as a finance manager, later promoted to project manager, at Central Florida Investments, a major timeshare company in the Orlando area. For those who don't know, timeshares are big business in Florida. It's a lucrative industry, and Jennifer was doing well. By 2005, at just 24 years old, Jennifer had saved enough money to purchase her own condo. Not rent, buy. She bought a condo at the Mosaic at Millenia, a relatively new complex near the mall at Millenia in Orlando. It was a beautiful place, a gated community, and it represented everything Jennifer had worked for: independence, success, stability. Her mother Joyce later said, "She was just really happy." Now let's talk about Jennifer's relationship status, because this becomes important to the timeline. In 2005, Jennifer met a guy named Rob Allen at the Tiki Bar in downtown Orlando. Rob was 29, a few years older than Jennifer, and he lived in Fort Lauderdale, about 3 hours south of Orlando. They started dating, and despite the distance, they made it work. They saw each other every weekend, alternating who would drive. It was a long-distance relationship, but they were committed to each other. Jennifer's mother Joyce said, she was in love. But long-distance relationships are hard. And by early 2006, the distance was starting to take a toll on both of them. Now, there's one more detail about Jennifer that becomes really important in this case. She was a creature of habit. Jennifer was predictable in the best way. She texted or called Rob every single morning before leaving for work. She called her parents regularly. She was punctual. She was organized. She kept a routine. This detail is crucial because when Jennifer broke from her routine, when she didn't call, didn't text, didn't show up, everyone immediately knew something was wrong. And there was one more thing that was bothering Jennifer in the weeks before she disappeared: the construction workers at her condo complex. When Jennifer moved into the Mosaic at Millennia in 2005, the complex was still being built. There were construction workers everywhere, laying carpet, installing fixtures, painting walls. And many of these workers were living in the empty, unsold condos while they worked. Now, this isn't necessarily unusual for a construction project. But what was unusual was how some of these workers behaved around Jennifer. According to her family, Jennifer had complained multiple times about feeling uncomfortable around the construction workers. They would stop and stare at her when she walked by. They would make comments. They would catcall her. Jennifer told her parents about it. She even filed a formal complaint with the property management company. Her father Drew told her, "If you ever feel threatened or in danger, call me immediately and I will come to Orlando and take care of it." But Jennifer was independent. She didn't want to make a big deal out of it. She just wanted to live her life. Her uncle, Bill Gilmore, later wrote a book about Jennifer's disappearance. In it, he said Jennifer felt like she was being watched. She felt subjected to unwanted stares. She felt uncomfortable in her own home. One of Jennifer's friends later told investigators that the workers would just stop and stare at her. A few friends told her that if the workers started to verbally harass her, to go to the manager, but thankfully it never escalated to that. Or not that we know of anyway. Private investigator Michael Toretta, who was later hired by the Kesse family, developed a theory based on interviews with people who lived at the complex. He believed that up to 10 construction workers were living in an empty apartment directly across the hall from Jennifer's unit. Think about that. 10 men, living right across from a young woman living alone, with access to master keys, with knowledge of her schedule, with opportunity. This theory has never been proven. The complex management denied it. But it remains one of the most compelling explanations for what happened to Jennifer. Now, one worker in particular would become a major person of interest in Jennifer's case. His name was Chino, and we'll get to him in a bit. But first, let's talk about the week before Jennifer disappeared. Because that week is important. In mid-January 2006, Jennifer took a weekend trip to St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands with her boyfriend Rob. It was a romantic getaway, beaches, sunshine, quality time together. They both needed it. Jennifer's best friend later said, "Oh, you're in love and you just don't want to admit it." The trip went well. Jennifer came back happy, relaxed, and optimistic about the future. While Jennifer was away, her younger brother Logan and his friends stayed at her condo. One of Logan's friends accidentally left his cell phone at Jennifer's place. This detail becomes relevant later. Jennifer got back to Florida on Sunday, January 22nd. But instead of going straight home to Orlando, she spent the night at Rob's place in Fort Lauderdale. On Monday, January 23rd, Jennifer drove directly from Fort Lauderdale to her office in Orlando. She had a busy day at work, meetings, projects, the usual. She had a meeting with her boss at 6 p.m., and then she drove straight home. Toll booth cameras captured her on her usual route. She got home around 6:30 or 7 p.m. Once she got home, Jennifer made several phone calls. She called her friend Lauren to chat about the vacation. Lauren later said Jennifer seemed in a little bit of a funky mood just because it was the end of a vacation. She also said, "I think the distance was becoming more apparent to her in her relationship." So Jennifer was a little down about the long-distance thing. but nothing alarming. Jennifer also called her parents and her brother Logan. Her father Drew said, "She absolutely loved the trip, and everything was absolutely fine when we talked to her." Jennifer also called her brother's friend Travis about his cell phone. She agreed to mail it to him from her workplace the next day. And finally, around 10 p.m., Jennifer called Rob. They talked for a while. And here's where things get a little tense. According to Rob, they had a disagreement during the call. He described it as the kind of argument any husband, wife, boyfriend, any couple might have. Specifically, the disagreement was about the strains of maintaining a long-distance relationship. Rob said Jennifer was already in bed during the call. She told him she was tired from the vacation and from a long day at work. And then, during the call, there was a knock at Jennifer's door. Rob later told CNN that Jennifer said she assumed it was a male upstairs neighbor, and didn't get up to answer it while they were on the phone. That knock has haunted investigators ever since. Who was at Jennifer's door at 10 p.m. on January 23rd? And did that person have anything to do with her disappearance? We don't know. Jennifer and Rob finished their conversation, said goodnight, and hung up. That was the last time Rob Allen ever spoke to Jennifer Kesse. The morning of Tuesday, January 24, 2006. Jennifer's routine was simple. She would wake up, shower, get dressed, and text or call Rob before leaving for work. Every single morning, without fail. But on January 24th, there was no call. No text. Rob tried reaching her. Her phone went straight to voicemail. He left messages, assuming she was just busy or her phone had died. But as the morning went on and he still couldn't reach her, he started to worry. Meanwhile, Jennifer didn't show up for work. When she missed a morning meeting, her employer tried calling her. No answer. They called her parents. Joyce and Drew Kesse immediately tried calling Jennifer. Straight to voicemail. They tried again. And again. Nothing. This was not like Jennifer. She always answered her phone. She always called back. Joyce and Drew looked at each other and said, "Something is wrong." They grabbed their son Logan, jumped in the car, and made the 2-hour drive from Tampa to Orlando. When they arrived at Jennifer's condo, they used their spare key to get inside. And here's what they found. The condo looked completely normal. In fact, it looked like Jennifer had just been there that morning. There was makeup all over the bathroom counter. Clothes were laid out on the bed, outfits she'd been considering wearing to work. A damp towel was on the floor near the shower. The shower itself was still wet in the corners. Everything suggested that Jennifer had gotten ready for work that morning. But her purse was gone. Her keys were gone. Her cell phone was gone. Her briefcase was gone. And her car was gone. Joyce and Drew immediately called the Orlando Police Department to report Jennifer missing. And that's when the massive search began. Friends and family printed flyers with Jennifer's photo. Volunteers organized search parties. Police brought in helicopters, search dogs, boats, everything. But there was no sign of Jennifer. For 2 days, everyone searched frantically. Where was she? Where was her car? And then, on January 26, 2 days after Jennifer vanished, her car was found. Jennifer's car, a black 2004 Chevy Malibu, was found parked at the Huntington on the Green apartment complex. This complex was about 1.1 miles from Jennifer's condo. It was in a higher crime area. And it was not a place Jennifer would normally go. The car was parked in a spot, locked, with no visible damage. But when police processed it, something was strange. On the hood of the car, there appeared to be evidence that someone, or something, had been pushed or dragged across it. Detectives noted what looked like a struggle on the front of the vehicle. Inside the car, police found Jennifer's work clothes neatly laid out in the back seat. But no purse, no cell phone, no keys, no briefcase. And here's the really interesting part. When they dusted for fingerprints, they found that the car had been wiped down. Not completely, there were a few prints, but it was clear someone had tried to clean it. The only DNA found initially was on the steering wheel. Later, in 2025, investigators announced they'd found additional DNA and evidence that had never been tested. But at the time, there wasn't much to go on. Now, here's where the case gets really frustrating. The Huntington on the Green apartment complex had security cameras, and those cameras captured someone parking Jennifer's car. The footage shows a person parking the Malibu at approximately 12 p.m. on January 24, the day Jennifer disappeared. The person gets out of the car, walks through the parking lot, and exits the frame. Police released the surveillance images to the public, hoping someone would recognize the individual. But there was a problem. A huge problem. In every single frame of the footage, every single one, the person's face is obscured by a fence post. The camera was programmed to take pictures every 3 seconds. And in each frame, as the person walks, their face is perfectly blocked by the fence. It's almost like they knew where the camera was and timed their walk to stay hidden. The FBI tried to enhance the images. They used every technology available. But they couldn't identify the person. They couldn't even determine if it was a man or a woman. The only thing they could determine was the person's approximate height, between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 5. That's it. That's all they have. This person of interest, is the key to the entire case. And nearly 20 years later, they still haven't been identified. So who took Jennifer Kesse? After nearly 20 years, investigators still don't have a definitive answer. But they have theories, and they have suspects. Let's talk about the main person of interest. A man known as Chino. About 3 years after Jennifer disappeared, a former housekeeper at the Mosaic at Millenia came forward with information. She told detectives that the person in the surveillance footage looked like a man she knew, a maintenance worker who went by the name Chino. Chino had worked at Jennifer's condo complex. In fact, he'd done repairs in Jennifer's unit just 1 week before she disappeared. Detective Joel Wright, who was leading the investigation at the time, found something interesting. An anonymous tip had been called in right after Jennifer vanished, also mentioning Chino. So Detective Wright tracked Chino down. In 2009, he found him in prison, where Chino was serving time for statutory rape, an unrelated charge. Wright interviewed Chino, and Chino said he remembered Jennifer. He said he'd been in her condo doing repairs. He said everything was normal. But when asked if he had anything to do with her disappearance, Chino said, "No. I don't have any idea what happened to her." Chino took a polygraph test. And he passed. So despite being a person of interest, Chino has never been charged. And without evidence, police couldn't do anything more. But here's the thing. Private investigator Michael Toretta, hired by the Kesse family, believes the answer lies with the construction workers. He believes up to 10 workers were living across the hall from Jennifer. He believes one of them abducted her the morning of January 24 as she was walking to her car. There's also another lead that came up in 2019. A woman called in a tip saying that on the day Jennifer disappeared, she witnessed something strange at Lake Fisher in Orange County. She said she saw someone dump what looked like a rolled-up carpet into the lake. In November 2019, police brought in a dive team to search the lake. They searched for 2 days. They found nothing. And finally, in October 2025, just recently, Jennifer's father Drew announced that the Florida Department of Law Enforcement had found new DNA evidence that had never been tested before. They've also narrowed down their list of suspects significantly. Drew said, "We have a better chance at finding Jennifer than in previous years." So after nearly 20 years, there's finally hope. Not closure, but hope. Jennifer Kesse's case is still open. Her family still searches. And somewhere out there, someone knows what happened to her. If you know anything at all, please contact the Florida Department of Law Enforcement or the Orlando Police Department. Thanks for listening tonight. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Subscribe for more updates. Good night.